12, we see the story kind of come to the story so far is speeding through and it comes to a halt. Narratively speaking, Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 11 is about 2,000 years, which is equal to Genesis chapter 12 through Revelation 22, the rest of the Bible. The first 11 chapters of Scripture, again, narratively speaking, is 2,000 years, which is equivalent to the rest of Scripture. So there's like barreling down the story, and it comes to a halt at Genesis 12. And in Genesis 12, God shows us, it's like the story is saying, all right, here we go. Now the story is going to pick up. And in Genesis 12, we're introduced more fully to a character by the name of Abram. And the scriptures say in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and go from your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I'll make you a great nation, and I'll bless you, and I'll make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I'll curse, and in all the families of the earth, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And it says, so Abram went as the Lord told him, and departed. Now, so the interesting thing about this here is, so we're introduced to this character, and we know very little about him. And all of a sudden, God pops out of nowhere and lays this huge thing on him. And so, keep in mind, one thing, to start with Abraham, who's Abraham? What's the point here? Why is the story picking up here? So, Abram right here, not Abraham yet, Abram, he is, the scriptures don't, in this time in history, Abram is from a family that did not worship God. Because we're picking up in Genesis 12, and we've skipped over a bunch of chapters. And you're saying, well, what happened in those chapters? That cycle of sin, that cycle of brokenness is increasing to the point where the scriptures say that at this point there's not even any faithful knowledge of God on the earth. And as a result, Abram's family, they were a family who, like any other family in the ancient Near East, who worshiped many gods, many different idols and pagan deities and things of that nature. And so their perception of God, like all the rest of the world, when we're not focused, when we don't have something that shows us who the true God is, we begin to recreate God in our own image. Let me say that again. So many of us, if we don't have a picture of who God really is to calibrate our idea of who God is, we begin to create a God in our image. And we take elements from the culture and we wrap it all up into who we think God is. That happens so many times. That has happened so many times. Unfortunately, throughout church history, the way the church has presented God many times has been that. And maybe we like to think that we know who the real God is. We have a relationship with Jesus and all this. However, there's a big difference between who we say we think God is verbally, theoretically, and who deep down subconsciously we really feel God is. Sometimes that who we think and who we know God is, the true picture of God that we find in Jesus, hasn't really penetrated the depths of who we are. And subconsciously, it's like we still view God as this Zeus-like character, just waiting with his thunderbolts to bring mass war and defeat his enemies, and you too if you trip up at all, But that's not who God is. And so, just like that, Abram and his family worship many gods, and all of a sudden, this one particular God, because the gods weren't personal. You couldn't know God. You couldn't know these gods in the ancient Near Eastern culture. But all of a sudden, this God comes to Abram, and he talks to him. And he doesn't just talk to him. He initiates something. He initiates, the first thing, is that which was broken, that which was given in the garden, it was broken. He initiates a relationship with Abram. He comes to him, and he looks down, and he's kind of like, "Hey, buddy." And Abram's like, Yeah. Want to go on an adventure? And Abram's like, okay. Now, what relationship doesn't grow in a situation like that? You know what I mean? You know, like some of the best relationships that I have are the relationships when I'm be like, hey, you want to just go do something stupid? Sure, you know. We had a no, I won't tell a joke. Anyway, filter, boom. Okay. Anyway, if you want another joke, come talk to me later. It could be offensive in mass. I don't want to do that. So, okay, I'll tell it. No, so it's not against any particular group of people, but so my dad has always talked about his family, not his family, but some friends of his. He goes, yeah, some friends of mine, yeah, they're redneck hillbillies, you know. And he's so I always heard this joke that say, what's the last words you hear a redneck say before he dies? Hey, y'all, watch this. You know? So that the best relationships ever start with that. Let's go do something crazy. Watch this. You know what I mean? How many bones have been broken starting with this story starting that way? You know what I mean? So God comes to Abram. He's like, let's go on an adventure. And Abraham goes, okay. And so he starts this relationship with him. And throughout the next few chapters, we see God doing something that the scriptures call making a covenant with Abraham. And Abraham, this idea of a covenant is, we talked about this before, but the covenant is this ancient, the ancient binding relationship. And the only thing in our culture that is similar to that is kind of marriage. However, a covenant marriage was a form of a covenant, but the general idea of a covenant was a relationship that could not be broken. And if it was broken, your own family could seek your death. It was that binding. And so Abraham, when God comes down and says, I want to cut a covenant with you, Abram is like, wow, a covenant is something if my tribe is good at cooking, but we can't fight for anything, and your tribe has great weapons and you can't cook, we make a covenant, and no matter what, we're bound together and we got each other's back, and nothing can break that. But that's between two tribes. What happens if the God of the universe comes and says, I'm going to cut a covenant with you? God's first response to this brokenness is to build a relationship. And he does that with Abram. But that's not the only thing he does. So he has this. The first thing is he builds this relationship. And the second thing, we're whipping this bad boy out again. The second thing that God does, you've probably seen this before. So I keep tripping up. I keep calling him Abram and Abraham and da-da-da. So his name is Abram. But God comes down. And so we have over here, let's try to draw it as big as I possibly can. I can zoom in on it. So in Hebrew, that's Abram. God comes and says, no longer are you going to be called Abram, but now you're going to be called Abraham. Now, why such subtle differences? It's because I'm running out of space up here. This is the name of God in Hebrew. This here, this is a little vowel that makes an ah sound, and this is kind of an H sound. Abram, Abraham. God literally puts the first part of his name into Abram's name. And he says, no longer are you going to be called Abram, but now you're called Abraham. And so whenever anybody utters your name, you're going to be forced to see that God's identity is now part of your identity. This relationship is going to go so deep that it's going to penetrate your very identity. It's not Abraham, it's Abraham. The Yahweh, Abraham goes in there. But that's not all. Because then he goes and he does the same thing to Sarah, to Sarai. So I'll draw a little bigger up here. Oh, that's a horrible yod. Okay. So here's God's name. This is Yahweh. And down here, if we did this, that's Sarai. Instead, we have Sarah. God literally puts his name inside of both of their names. So instead of Abram, it's Abraham. Sarai, Sarah. God says, I am giving you my identity. And now, this relationship you have, this identity is going to, this relationship, through this relationship, is going to communicate to you an identity. And not only that, but you're going to have a new place where I'm going to bring you to a place where I show you. But then, with that, so we've got a new relationship. He's got a new identity. We're going to get him to a new land, a new place, flowing with milk and honey. But then, the fourth thing is he's going to give him a promise. And the promise is that in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. He makes this promise, and I find it interesting that the promise is not something that he's going to give him. The promise is something that Abraham is going to receive from God, and it's nothing that he can do. God is the only one that can bring it to pass. He says, I'm going to make you a family, and I'm going to make you, out of that family, a nation. And out of that family and out of that nation is going to be an avenue that the entire globe is going to be blessed. And that's going to start with you. And it's this promise that he makes. And I remember when my daughter, I'm going to pick on you, sweetheart. My daughter, Olivia, she's 9 years old. And when she was like 1, when she would start to watch, she'd watch these Disney programs and everything, Disney movies and whatever. At the beginning of every Disney movie, there's that little, where they zero in on Cinderella's castle and a little shooting star, the little star shoots over it, and the Cinderella's castle and the moat and everything around it. And she would always be like, wow. And I'd say, you know what? That's a real castle in Europe. She's like, it is? And she's like, yeah. I said, yeah. And they made a replica of it at this place in Florida where there's all kinds of rides and characters, and there's you got to get there by a boat, to get to this amusement park. It's called Disney World. And she's like, wow. And so from then on, anytime she saw that little thing in front of a Disney movie, she'd say, wow, that's Cinderella's castle. She goes, Daddy, sometime you take me there. And I said, that's right, baby, I will. And about a year and a half ago, so that was when she was like 1. The first time we ever took her to a movie theater, when she was 2 years old, we're in the movie theater. We were seeing the movie Monsters University. And the beginning started, the movie started, and that Cinderella's castle thing starts up, star, bing, and the whole theater's quiet, and 2-year-old Olivia shouts, hey, that's Cinderella's castle! Someday my daddy take me there! And the entire theater turned around and erupted with laughter. and we just kind of put our heads down and laughed. Well, a year and a half ago, we finally got to go there. We had some friends that work at the Disney store, and if you work at the Disney store, isn't to just bust right in and make it perfect. Because as parents, we all know that if we don't let our kids struggle, they will never learn and they'll never grow. And we can't fly in and fix all their problems because then we're not always going to be there. They have to learn how to stand up and walk on their own 2 feet. And sometimes, as much as it hurts, you got to let them struggle. And God comes down, and his response isn't to snap his fingers and fix everything. God's response to the brokenness in the world is to start a family. And this starting of the family begins with the promise. And Abraham, Sarah, Sarai, they don't do anything. God's only response is to say, will you join me? Will you have faith? Will you trust me? The actual Hebrew word for trust, for faith, isn't necessarily just trust. It's actually allegiance. Will you follow me with your allegiance? Me alone. And Abram says, okay. And they begin this crazy, awesome journey with this family that grows and grows. And as we're going to talk about next week, this family grows, and God calls this beautiful family his people, through which the rest of the world will be blessed. But, as we so often do, because God calls us to be part of the solution, but we're part of the problem. God calls people that are part of the problem to be part of the solution. And that means things are going to get messy. That means things are going to go wrong. That means we're going to make bad decisions. We're going to trip up. And we're going to get into all kinds of stuff. And we're going to sometimes make that brokenness bigger in the world instead of mending it and bringing shalom, wholeness to it. But God does it anyway, because that's what love does. Love is risky. As we close, I remember a few years ago I was youth pastoring. It was about 12 years ago I was youth pastoring. And there was a family, the children's pastor and her family befriended a teenage boy. He was 15 years old, and he was a drug addict. And he wanted to get out of it, and they kind of took him in as their own, and they started bringing him to church. And we all of us in the church as a family kind of surrounded him and loved him and took him under our wings. And this church community was fantastic. It was a lot like this one in their relationships, and they're wonderful people, and they surrounded him and loved him, and we took him into our home, and we would give him rides home from church and bring him out to eat with us after church and just poured into him. And one day, at church on a Sunday morning, he was kind of looking a little tired, and I didn't think anything of it. The next day at staff meeting, there was kind of a somber tone, and I came in and said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, he goes, he ran away last night, and we don't know where he went." And unfortunately, none of us have ever seen him again. And I say that to say that that's a heartbreaking thing, and that busted us all up because we poured so much into him and we cared about him, and the thought of him going back into that environment is so painful. But the thing about it is that that's what love does, because love is risky. God came down to us, and he loves us with no guarantee that we're going to reciprocate that. But he does it anyway, because that's what love does. Love makes itself vulnerable. It puts up proper boundaries. It doesn't allow itself to be destroyed. But it loves accepting the risk. I love what Mother Teresa always used to say, and it's kind of a paraphrase, but she would always say, people they're going to hurt you, they're going to say all kinds of bad things about you, but love them anyway. Because it's not the great things that you do that will change the world. It's the little things that's done with great love that's what will change the world. And so just like our own brokenness in the story, God comes down and he combats this brokenness with a promise and a family. And so that's where we leave off, and we're going to talk about this more next week. So, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all of us here. And I pray, Lord, that you would reveal that beautiful risk-taking love that renames us, that communicates your identity to us, that builds relationship and a covenant with us, that gives us a safe place, that gives us a purpose, a new purpose in life. That love that endlessly pursues, and that love that risks everything, with no guarantee that it'll get anything in return, just because that's what love does. I ask, Father, that you would help us to see that love and experience that love together.
I lay each one down at your feet. Every moment of my wandering never changes what you see. I've tried to win this war, I confess. My hands are weary, I need your rest. Mighty warrior, king of the fight. No matter what I face, you're by my side. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Truth is, you know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day ahead you have not seen. So in all things, be my life and breath. I want what you want, Lord, and nothing and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There's not a place where you'll go I've not already stood. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you.
Wonderful evening. You're dismissed. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Feel free to go to your groups. If you, but.
Here in this worn and weary land, many a dream has died. Like a tree planted by the water, never will run dry. Living water flowing through, God, we thirst for more of you. Fill our hearts and flood our souls with one desire. Just to know you and to make you known, we lift your name on high. Shine like the sun, make darkness run and hide. We know we were made for so much more than ordinary lives. It's time for us to more than just survive. We were made to thrive. Into your word we're digging deep to know our Father's heart. Into the world we're reaching out to show them who you are. It's living water flowing through, God, we thirst for more of you. Fill our hearts and flood our souls with one desire. Just to know you and to make you known, we lift your name on high. Shine like the sun, make darkness run and hide. We know we were made for so much more